For 3,000 years, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt attempted to fulfill their greatest dream: immortality. There were different possible ways by which to succeed, and each chose their own. But only one, the greatest, tried them all: Ramesses II.
I'm introducing this episode to you, a story of a great king, the greatest of all the kings of ancient Egypt. You will go with me to his tomb and his temple to understand the quest for immortality.
It took just 3,000 years for the Egyptian civilization to come into being, reach its peak, and fall into decline. It did, nevertheless, succeed in preserving much of its ancient splendor and history, handed down through its monuments, knowledge, and men. However, we cannot describe all as simple men. Some should be considered gods: the pharaohs. Throughout the history of Egypt, many different pharaohs rose to the throne. Many left no real trace of their existence. Some achieved great feats. Few left proof of truly exceptional works, and only one succeeded in tasks worthy of a god: Ramesses II.
This is the tomb of Ramesses II. It was the first tomb to be constructed at the entrance of the Valley of the Kings. And this tomb, you can see it's about 686 meters square large. It is the largest tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The tomb actually is for one of the kings who ruled Egypt about 66 years.
Ramesses II died an old man at around the age of 90 in 1213 BC. As was the custom of such an important figure, he had a tomb built worthy of his importance, a place to preserve his body for all eternity. The layout of KV7 tomb is very complex. The large burial chamber, raised up on 8 pillars that today have unfortunately suffered a great deal of damage, is accessed through a long corridor. A number of secondary rooms lead off from the main chamber. Here, the mummified corpse of Ramesses II was laid to rest undisturbed forever. The tomb was, therefore, the most secret place there could be, a place that no one should or would ever be able to enter. And yet the life and work of Ramesses II was characterized by an impressive demonstration of his own personality. Each and every action, whether political, religious, social, or economical, served his own propaganda purpose. A prime example of this conduct is the Temple of Abu Simbel, ordered by Ramesses II to show off his own personality and intimidate populations beyond the southern borders of Egypt. The sheer size of the temple is striking. The facade alone stands 33 meters high and 38 meters wide, and is enhanced by 4 enormous seated statues of Ramesses, each more than 20 meters tall. And yet time waits for no man. Over the centuries, the temple was forgotten and covered over by sand from the desert, where it remained undisturbed until 1813, when it was rediscovered by the Swiss explorer Jean-Louis Burckhardt. It was the Italian Giovanni Belzoni, however, in 1817, who began removing the sand and first reached the entrance. sight before him is the same enjoyed by visitors today. A large room decorated by tall statues of Ramesses II as Osiris. This leads off to a series of other rooms. The walls are decorated with battle scenes, showing Ramesses defeating and subduing enemy populations. At the bottom, we find the Holy of the Holiest, the most sacred place of all. Here, 4 statues sit representing the pharaoh amidst the 3 gods to whom the temple is dedicated: Ra, Horakhti, Amon, and Ptah.
Well, the people considered him as a god, and he himself reclaimed that he is one of the gods. And you can see this very clear at the temple of Abu Simbel. When you reach the Holy of the Holiest at the end of the temple, you find Ramesses II is sitting beside other gods. So he is himself, he became himself a god.
In 1960, the Egyptian government began construction work on the Aswan High Dam to create Lake Nasser. The temple of Abu Simbel would have been submerged by the new lake. It was therefore decided that it should be saved, leading to the incredible feat sometime between 1964 and 1968, in which the 2 temples were dismantled into 1,500 blocks and rebuilt 65 meters higher up, to absolute perfection. Before being moved, the orientation was studied in such a way that on the 22nd of February and the 22nd of October, the rising sun lit the statues at the bottom. After the work was completed, this phenomenon now takes place one day early. The side rooms are instead decorated with many images of Ramesses II, together with the major divinities of the Egyptian pantheon. Ramesses had a smaller temple built next to the main one, which was devoted to Hathor, goddess of love, and his wife, Nefertari. Although smaller in size, it remains extremely important. This is the only Egyptian temple to be devoted to a queen. Nefertari was the first great royal wife of Ramesses II, and also the most loved. She was chosen for his son by Sethi I when the young prince was just 15 years old. Despite this, the royal couple were greatly in love, as can be seen by her inclusion at her husband's side in many of his monuments, at times even depicted of equal size, and by the many works devoted to her. But of all these, the most beautiful and important by far is in the Valley of the Queens.
This desolate wadi is the Valley of the Queens, one of the royal burial grounds of the New Kingdom. Ramesses II used this valley for the burial of his beloved mother Tuya, as well as for the burials of some of his great royal wives. Of these tombs, the most beautiful by far is that of his first and most favorite queen, Nefertari.
Still today, more than 3,000 years later, the tomb retains all its original splendor.
The tomb of Nefertari is considered by many the most beautiful tomb in the Theban necropolis. And I, for one, would not argue. It is truly incredible. Nefertari was the most important of Ramesses II's 8 chief wives. She married her husband before he came to the throne, and until she died in the 25th year of his reign, she was his most important, his principal consort. We can look at some of the beautiful scenes here. Here we have Nefertari. This is actually a spell from the Book of the Dead. And here she is playing the game of Senet against an invisible opponent. You can see how beautifully she's drawn, and there she is sitting in front of the Senet game. We see Nefertari as a mummy being protected by Isis and Nephthys, who are the sisters of Osiris and help him be resurrected. So she's again playing the role of Osiris here. Here she is as Osiris. Nefertari wears this red ribbon around her waist, and here she is as Osiris, again wearing this red ribbon. And you can also see this sort of feminine form of Osiris here. Normally Osiris is male, he's the king of the dead. He's the king of the netherworld, but here Nefertari is becoming Osiris. And now we'll go down to the netherworld. The tomb itself is a representation of the netherworld, so we will go down into the netherworld. We're now in the burial chamber, the deepest part of the tomb. The tomb was discovered in 1904 by Ernesto Schiaparelli. And when he found the tomb, it had already been robbed, probably in antiquity. Did find, however, the decoration much more intact than it is now. The tomb is built in not very good rock, in very friable rock, and the decoration is on plaster that was used to cover the walls and then carved and painted. So it comes away easily from the walls and suffers very easily from things like humidity. The decoration of the burial chamber is dedicated to Nefertari's interaction with various gods and goddesses, and also scenes and texts from the Book of the Dead. On this wall, we have Nefertari coming in and passing through the gates of the netherworld, which are guarded by these knife-wielding genii. Very interesting names. I particularly like the one in the middle, who has a woman's body, a lioness's head, and snake ears. The decoration in this side chamber is extremely well preserved and well worth looking at. Here we have some beautiful representations of Nefertari herself and a gallery of some of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. We begin here with Nefertari, beautifully attired in a flowing white garment, the red belt around her waist, the vulture headdress that identifies her as a queen and a queen mother, jewelry, rouge on her cheeks. She's really just beautiful. Making offerings to the god Ptah, the patron god of Memphis and the god of artisans. Then coming around here, we have another similar and equally beautiful representation of Nefertari again. Here she's with the god Thoth, the god of wisdom, the god of writing. So here on the back wall, we have some beautiful scenes of Nefertari offering to some other gods. Here we have Nefertari offering to the god Osiris, king of the netherworld, and these 4 little guys are the 4 sons of Horus. And here we have Nefertari making offerings, the same type of offering table, to the god Atum, the great creator god of Heliopolis, who wears the red and the white crown of a united Egypt. And also take a look here at Nefertari's cartouche. Her name is enclosed in this oval ring, like a king's name. In earlier times, it was only the king's name that could be in this cartouche, this oval ring that symbolizes eternity. By this time, important queens' names could also be put in cartouches. So here on the side wall, continuing onto this wall, we have an image of Nefertari worshiping the celestial cows and one bull. And here we have one of the most interesting scenes in the tomb. When Nefertari dies, she descends into the netherworld and is joined with Osiris. And then in the darkest hour of the night, Nefertari/Osiris is joined by Re, and together at dawn, they are reborn and resurrected, and creation begins again. And this being is protected here by Isis and Nephthys, and they can be identified by their names, which they wear on their heads.
Ramses II imposed the cult of his personality in many different ways. Perhaps the clearest of these was his enthusiasm to build, as shown by the expansion of the main temple complexes of Thebes, Karnak and Luxor. In the temple of Amun-Ra in Karnak, he created many important constructions. The great hypostyle hall designed by Amenhotep III was only begun by Sethi I. Ramses completed it, creating a huge area divided up by 134 24-meter-high columns with diameters exceeding 10 meters. He then decorated the walls of the room with bas-reliefs that celebrated his personality and military feats. He also ordered the construction of the great sacred lake that priests would enter to purify themselves before ritual ceremonies. The water of the lake, coming from the Nile, provides a symbolic representation of the primordial ocean from which, according to Egyptian religion, the world was born. In Luxor, his work as constructor was yet more evident. The temple entrance was divided up by a series of huge pillars. Opposite the first, 6 huge statues were carved, representing himself, 4 seated and 2 standing. Today, only fragments remain. The facade, on the other hand, is entirely decorated with battle scenes depicting him fighting at Kadesh in today's Syria against the Hittites. The courtyard of Ramses II, in which the pharaoh had many statues built in his image, is immediately beyond the entrance. The 14th century mosque of Abu el-Hajjaj faces onto the courtyard, and a very important discovery was recently made in the mosque.
In July 2007, there was a big fire inside the tomb of Abu el-Hajjaj, and this is, as we were aware about this site of the tomb of Abu el-Hajjaj, we were sure that there is something inside the tomb because it was built over part of the open court of Ramses II. That's why we took the chance and we began to reveal these inscriptions, which was covered by a thick layer of mortar made of clay, and this helped in keeping and preserving the reliefs and the scenes which was carved from the time of Ramses II, and nobody see it from this time until we revealed it last February. The meaning of this discovery, it completed the story of Ramses II here inside Luxor Temple. Ramses II did a lot of buildings at Luxor Temple. Ramses II, as you know, turned the land of Egypt to be an open court for his buildings, but this part was the lost part of what he did in Luxor Temple. So this is the first time we completed the story of his buildings inside this part of Luxor Temple.
But Ramses the Builder did much more. He created many works of art marked with scrolls bearing his name, and monuments decorated with statues that showed his triumphs. The best example of his ideals is the Ramesseum. Ramses II wanted to construct this important monument as his own funerary temple. Despite the fact that it was a public building, it was intended, just like a tomb, to carry out its own private function only after the sovereign's death. The temple was, in fact, designed not so much to house the pharaoh's body after his death, but rather as a place where all cults linked to his person would be celebrated for centuries. To create it, Ramses II dismantled and reused a whole series of other buildings. Strangely, the same fortune was also to befall the Ramesseum, which was gradually taken apart by later pharaohs. And yet, it continues to fascinate visitors as it must have done in the past.
Actually, when I come to this place, even at night, I can smell history. A history that cannot be written, cannot be known, because this man was unique. To come and sit beside this statue of Ramses II, about 1,000 tons. Can you believe it? This was cut from Aswan, from granite, came through the Nile to this place. We can imagine how the quest of immortality for the ancient Egyptian made them to this unique architecture.
The first courtyard of the Ramesseum housed many great statues of Ramses as Osiris. Today, unfortunately, many of these statues have been ruined, just like the enormous statue of the seated pharaoh. Originally 17 meters high, this is the demonstration of precisely how Ramses II celebrated the cult of his personality with majestic works.
So if any one of you who's hearing me now will come one day, stand beside this huge statue, you will feel as a dwarf. You will look in this temple and you will understand the quest of immortality of Ramses II.
Ramses II also encouraged the spread of his image and works through important actions. The pharaoh was born around 1300 BC in Avaris, a city of ancient traditions, and it was here, during the early years of his reign, that he decided to build a new capital, Ramses. Almost nothing remains today of the ancient splendor of this great city. And what has been preserved is now buried in an area that is today used for agricultural production. The name meant Ramses' house, and it actually remained his house until his death. But why did Ramses II want to build a new city right on the delta, so far from what had always been the main centers of power of ancient Egypt?
Reason number one, his family originated from here, from these surroundings. Reason number two is a political one. He was interested, along with his followers, into gaining power in the Middle East, in the near Middle East, nowadays Syria, Palestine. Reason number three, and most of it obviously most important, an economical reason. He wanted to trade on the routes far to the north, via land and via sea, and there were excellent connections to these routes to nowadays Turkey, Greece, or to the east, even to Afghanistan and beyond.
Thanks to German archaeologist Edgar Pusch and his team, working in today's village of Cantir, where Ramses stood so long ago, today we have a clearer idea as to how the city must have looked in ancient times.
At the top of its splendor, Ramesses was one of the major cities of the world, if not the biggest one. It covered an area of about 30 square kilometers, which is even to be compared to Rome at its peak and height of splendor.
Most of the materials used to build P. Ramses were taken apart and reused in the construction of a new city, Tanis. The reasoning behind this choice was mainly religious. The priests of Amun, the main creator god according to Theban cosmogony, were against those of Seth, whose power was centered in the western area of the delta. Gradually, the priests of Amun had the better of those of Seth, the dynastic god of the family of Ramses. It was thus decided to destroy P. Ramses and create a new capital with those materials, Tanis. This important decision allowed Ramses II to reap the rewards of all his predecessors had done. Starting with the person who had given life to a new royal stock, his grandfather Ramses I, with whom an important era of Egyptian history began, with him a new dynasty was born, the 19th, and the central power began to move towards the delta area.
Ramses I reigned for a very short time and then was succeeded by his son, Seti I. Seti I's son was Ramses II, and his mother, Ramses II's mother, was named Tuya, and she was also from a military family, and Ramses II was very devoted to his mother and built monuments for her and treated her very well. Ramses II was very important during his father's reign. He was commander-in-chief of the army. He led the Egyptian army into battle. He helped with his father's building projects. And when his father died, he was more than ready to become king himself.
It was thus that Ramses II, having become king, enjoyed the inheritance left by his forefathers, completing their ideals. Simply building a new capital was not enough for the young pharaoh. He understood that in order to promote the cult of his power, he needed to spread his image throughout Egypt. The image that Ramses II wanted to leave behind was that of a young warrior, ready to fight and conquer for the glory of his people. And this is precisely what is represented in his statues, which, however, would appear to differ significantly from his mummy.
Fortunately, the mummy of Ramses II, who died at approximately 90 years of age, was rediscovered and is still available to make a comparison between the symmetry of his statue and the king himself. As opposed to the statue of Akhenaten, the statues of Ramses II do not depict the king as a man, but rather emphasize the physical characteristics of a king.
But a king had great responsibilities. Ramses II was well able to bear his and to guarantee peace to his people, and did not hesitate in declaring war when necessary. His main enemies were the Hittites, who he faced in the legendary Battle of Kadesh. Ramses wanted the main temples and monuments he had constructed to show a detailed account of the battle. From the bas-reliefs of the Ramesseum, Karnak, and particularly Abu Simbel, we can reconstruct the main stages of this battle. Ramses took a powerful army to Kadesh, capital of the Hittite Empire. But the Hittite army was no less powerful. After the initial skirmishes, Ramses fell into a carefully laid enemy trap. 2 captured spies declared that the Hittite army was a long way from Kadesh and that the city had therefore been left undefended. The pharaoh launched his attack, which was immediately answered by the Hittites, who were, contrary to the spies' accounts, hidden within the stronghold. Ramses reorganized his forces, passed the Orontes River, and decided to besiege the city. The Hittites defended themselves so well that in the end the battle came to a natural conclusion, with neither side admitting defeat, and both maintaining that they had won. And yet not everyone would appear to agree with this version.
But from looking at all the record and looking at the Hittites' record, we can understand that Ramses II was defeated by the Hittites. He did not win the war at all. Then actually, I'm the one who believes that Ramses II never won the Battle of Karnak. And the main reason for that is the propaganda everywhere. And the second important reason is the idea of the spy. That because of the wrong information that he got, he left his army on his back and he went alone with his army to go after the Hittites. And this is why I really believe that he lost the battle.
What we do know is that the 2 sides, having realized that victory was impossible, decided to form an alliance against a common enemy, the Assyrians. Yet again, Ramses II showed he was a true forerunner, drawing up the first ever peace treaty in history. But the pharaoh wanted more. He ordered the text of the marriage agreement between himself and one of the daughters of the Hittite king to be sculpted into the Abu Simbel temple facade. The sovereign thus sealed an everlasting pact with the very person who, up until then, had been his greatest enemy.
The daughter of the great chief of Hatti, after having crossed Egypt, was brought before His Majesty. His Majesty saw that she was fair of face as a goddess. He ordered her name to be wife of the king, Mahat Hor Neferure, that she may live long.
In Saqqara, a team led by the archaeologist Alen Zivi, investigating the ancient necropolis of Memphis, made an extremely important discovery: the tomb of a person closely linked to the Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty.
The owner of the tomb. Who was the owner of the tomb? What is the meaning of this tomb? What does it bring new? Very much, because here we have the clue, the main one. We have 2 names with some titles. We have the name which I read, can be discussed, but Necheruimes, the one who was born from the 2 gods, Horus and Set. Okay, one. And here I was so puzzled during some time, a long time, as a matter of fact, before we made a complete discovery, another name, Pacharnua, or Pirarnua. All this we knew, and we knew also from the Hittite source, Hittite side, with the diplomatic correspondence found in Bogasköy, which is was the main city of the Hittite, Hattusa in Anatolia, now Turkey, not so far from Ankara. And in this diplomatic correspondence, the Hittites several times spoke about a royal pharaonic, a royal Egyptian envoy, messenger, ambassador, we can call him an ambassador, who was called Pacharnawa or Pirarnawa. And this Pirarnawa was just a name. And one day I understood suddenly that because I knew that this guy, the owner of this tomb, was also a royal messenger, a royal ambassador. We were in the time of Ramesses II. We have the cartouche. I understood Pacharnawa is here. This is the tomb of the Pirarnawa mentioned by the Hittites.
Ramses II proved to be a clever politician and worthy warrior. He created works destined to last forever. He loved and was loved by his people, and upon his death left a wealthy, peaceful kingdom. This led his heir, Merenptah, facing the difficult, if not impossible, task of living up to comparison.
Merenptah was the son of Ramesses the Great and his second chief queen, Iset-Nofret. He was appointed crown prince in about the 55th year of his father's 67-year-long reign, surviving 12 older brothers and half-brothers to attain this rank. He was himself relatively old when he succeeded his father.
After having waited many years and finally having come to the throne, Merenptah found he faced an impossible task: to live up to comparison with his father. He failed and was equal to his father in only one thing: his tomb.
Merenptah died after about 10 years as king of Egypt and was buried in this enormous tomb, one of the biggest in the Valley of the Kings.
The large burial chamber, accessible through a long, steep corridor, still holds the large alabaster sarcophagus that housed the pharaoh's mummy, now preserved in the Egyptian Museum of Cairo. Merenptah was only one of the more than 100 children that sources attribute to Ramesses II. The celebration of his personality and the ultimate goal of reaching immortality would of course continue through his descendants, and Ramesses understood this better than any other. And yet such greatness also brought him great pain. Having reigned until the age of almost 90, he saw many of his children die before him. This was perhaps why he decided to build a tomb in which to preserve the mortal remains of his children in an attempt to guarantee their immortality too.
Here we are in one of the largest tombs in the Valley of the Kings, KV5. This tomb, as our American colleagues who are excavating here said, that Ramesses II planned to build this tomb for his sons. As we know, Ramesses II has more than 100 sons and daughters, and we have found some of the tombs of these sons and daughters, but most of the names of his sons we did not find until now their tombs. So that's why they thought that Ramesses II planned to design and build this tomb to be the eternal place for the bodies of his sons.
In 1825, the English archaeologist James Burton discovered the entrance to a tomb identified as KV5. The inside of the tomb, however, was in such disastrous conditions that the archaeologist, after having visited just a few of the rooms, thought the structure without value. The tomb was then forgotten about for more than 150 years. It was only in 1989 that the American archaeologist Kent Weeks rediscovered the entrance and began an in-depth systematic investigation. After years of painstaking research, in 1995 he made an important discovery. Whilst he and his team were digging in the main chamber, called Chamber 3, he went through a pile of rubble to find himself in a corridor more than 60 meters long, with many other rooms opening up to the sides. The discovery was considered the most important since that of Tutankhamun. From the few bas-reliefs on the walls and the many objects found on the ground, Kent Weeks reached the conclusion that it was the burial house of Ramesses' children. A point of view that is not shared by all.
This tomb is the largest in the valley. This tomb is a big mystery. This tomb has a lot to be discovered inside it. This tomb still needs more restorations, more excavations. So that's why I think it is a big riddle, a big mystery for us to say the value of the kings.
No one knows exactly what happened to the mummies that were preserved in KV5. Perhaps some were stolen or destroyed. Others may have been moved to preserve them better and to stop grave robbers from reaching them, as was the case with the mummy of Ramesses II. It was found in 1881 in a secret hiding place in Deir el-Bahari near the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, where many other royal mummies had been hidden. The pharaoh's body was probably moved there shortly after his death. His tomb was thus abandoned or reused for other purposes over the centuries, also deteriorating due to flooding and earthquakes. Important restoration work is now underway.
As the head of Antiquities now, I'm looking for people to restore this tomb. Because even there is very little scenes that you can see in this tomb, but still it has the smell of the most famous king of ancient Egypt, Ramesses the Great.
Great monuments destined to last for thousands of years. Works of art to hand down his name from generation to generation. Military feats of epic proportions. And more than 100 children to continue the stock that was to bring Egypt to the peak of its greatness. All this in a single man. Ramesses II. He was the only pharaoh to explore all the paths to immortality. And he did so as a man, as a king, and as a god. East, west. The two directions that indicate the boundary between life and death for the Egyptian civilization.
The Nile was the source of the life, and also it was the source of the life for the ancient Egyptians.
A magical place where history has put its foundations. Where the gods and their human incarnations, the pharaohs, have been adored and venerated. 3,000 years concentrated in an area of over 5,000 square kilometers. The cult of Amen, the invisible god. Foundation, apogee, and decadence of the biggest and most majestic temples of human civilization. Karnak and Luxor.
Come to the chosen place, Ibit Sut, as the ancient Egyptian called the temples of Karnak.
A long course of water separating the living and the dead. The Nile, flowing from south to north, determined for Egypt the ancient general axis of the earth. The course of the sun, from east to west, crossed the terrestrial line and defined in this way the divine universe. Ra, the sun, was considered the essential manifestation of the creative energy of life. According to the Egyptian tradition, the West Bank, where the sun sets, is the place for the nightly regeneration of Ra. There, the Egyptians built their necropolis. Vice versa, the eastern bank of the river, the area where the sun rises, is the suitable place for welcoming human activity and the great places for cult. Exactly on this bank of the river, in the area bordering Thebes, the Egyptians built the terrestrial fulcrum of the creative energy, the sanctuary of Karnak.
The ancient Egyptians connected the West with the dead or with the death because they saw the sunrise rising from the east and it goes to be its end in the west. So they put their tombs in the west and everything connecting with their daily life, especially the religion, it should be to the east.
The city of 100 gates. Homer baptized Thebes in this way in part of the Iliad, probably influenced by the majesty of its temples. Al-Karnak, fortified village. The present name of the temple derives from an archaic Arabic phrase. In effect, the complex of Karnak, with its majestic towers and its massive walls, must seem a real and proper fortress to the eyes of the Arabs and the visitors in general. Thebes, at the apex of its splendor, was the center of the economic and religious power of Egypt. With the rise of the 18th dynasty, Thebes became the capital of Egypt, and Karnak the religious epicenter of the country. The Temple of Amen alone possessed over 230,000 hectares. The men at the service of the temple were more than 80,000. A real and proper auto-sufficient world in which the pharaohs, over the centuries, wanted to leave their own mark, adding halls and monuments.
Karnak temple is not really one temple, it's temples built from the time of the Middle Kingdom. Even we have evidence from the Old Kingdom, but the main construction we have from Xerxes I, from Dynasty 12, the Middle Kingdom, more than 3,800 years ago.
Karnak Temple is one of the largest temples ever built in Egypt. It occupies more than 202 acres, and it has different temples. The main temple which was dedicated to the god Amun-Ra, which is behind us here. This is the main temple which was built for the main god of Thebes.
The Temple of Karnak is dedicated to three divinities: Amun-Ra, king of all the gods, Mut, his wife, and Khonsu, their young son. Together, the three divinities form the Theban triad.
This is the small temple of Ramesses III that lies within the great precinct of Amun-Ra at Karnak. Amun-Ra was the greatest of the Egyptian gods from the New Kingdom on. Amun was worshipped here with his consort Mut and their son Khonsu. Mut was a mother goddess. Her name was written with the sign of a vulture, and actually in ancient Egyptian, this is the word for mother. Khonsu was a lunar god who was principally responsible for keeping track of time with the god of wisdom Thoth.
The principal nucleus of Karnak is the Temple of Amun. The structure of the temple divides into two parts. The first follows the east-west axis. Each of these parts is overlooked by towers that delimit the access to courtyards and rooms. The second part of the structure is aligned with the north-south axis. From these directions, the temple continues through a series of 4 towers, called the Propylaea of the South, in an avenue of sphinxes towards the boundary of the Temple of Mut. entrance of the temple is that bounded by the 4 towers and the room of the feasts, or Akmenu. The sanctuary is a temple made up of chambers with a telescopic structure that narrows gradually in order to focus the attention on the statue of Amen.
The meaning of the entire complex to be a temples for the god Amun. The ancient Egyptian called these temples Ber Amun in hieroglyphics, means the land or the place of Amun. And they called it also Ibit Sut, meant the chosen place. This is actually the chosen place of the god Amun.
Thou art Amun, Lord of the silence, who cometh to the cry of the humble. I implore thee, because I am sick, and already thou came and saved me. Thou who giveth breath to whom is without, save me, who is in desperation. Thou art Amun-Ra, Lord of Thebes.
The fortune of Amun and the role of divine leader of the Egyptian pantheon coincides with the ascent of the people of Thebes. Originally, Amun was a little-known primordial god. It was the theologians of the Middle Kingdom who attributed to him a new significance. Amun the invisible, the hidden, the transcendent god, king of the gods. In parallel with the expansionist policy of the sovereigns of the 18th dynasty, Amun became the gatherer of immense economic fortunes. The power of the priests that administered the cult grew. From warrior god to cosmic god, through fusion with the sun god Ra. Amun the invisible and Ra, the god who regulated the seasons, became a single god.
Here, the appearance of Amun were done inside his chapel, and also during the night there was the appearance of Khonsu. Khonsu came, his name came from Khinis, and Khinis means the crossing of the sky during the night.
In the sanctuary, one sees a gradual reduction of the luminosity, from the full light of the courtyard to the obscurity of the cell, the extreme point of the world in which heaven and earth are united at dawn and in the darkness of twilight. But it is in the intermediate place that the maximum tension between light and darkness is expressed. The hypostyle hall.
We are in the most important place, the hypostyle hall in the temple of Karnak. I like to come here all the time. When I look at the pillars, the great pillars, I feel like a dwarf. This hypostyle hall, first built by the grandfather of Ramesses II, Ramesses I, and his father, Seti I. And Ramesses II finished this hypostyle hall. It's like 134 huge pillars in about 14 rows.
The great hypostyle atrium was created by the will of Amenhotep III. The central colonnade is flanked by 122 columns of smaller proportions. The difference in height created between the central nave and the 2 aisles, illuminated by the play of light of the windows in open-work calcareous stone, assumes a strong symbolic characteristic. The light divides into 2 zones, the huge capitals, leaving the lower part in the shade, so giving the impression of an even greater height. The psychological intent of this complex is to provoke a kind of anxiety with respect to the divinity.
Then you can imagine that this hypostyle hall was roofed with only a slight of open place to give light. It was incredible. You can imagine, if you close your eyes with me, you can imagine the past. If you close this hypostyle hall with a roof and you come to this place, your heart will tremble. Your heart will tremble of magic.
That of the Temple of Karnak is one of the largest and arduous hypostyle halls ever constructed. Its construction involved the reigns of many sovereigns up to the dynasty of Ramses, in particular Seti I and Ramesses II. The 134 columns represent sheaves of high papyri. The effect of the repetition in the originals was accentuated by the lively multicoloring that should have contributed in facilitating the osmosis between building and nature. The 12 central columns of the central nave, 22 meters high including the abacus, terminate with a capital as an open papyrus flower, while the 122 aisles, 18 meters high, have a capital with a closed bud. The alignment of the central nave of the main hall of the temple underlines the function of a passage to the sanctuary. Another axis, perpendicular to the first, divides the space in halves, and through the two side doors puts the hall in communication with the Temple of Mut. If the world is chaos, the temple is the center in which the order of things is ensured. In order to do this, the protection of God must be guaranteed. Feeding him, dressing him, praying to him. By taking care of his image, the priests in reality ensure the continuity of the cosmic order.
I'm standing in front of the sacred lake in the complex of Amun-Re at Karnak. According to the Egyptian creation myths, the world before creation was filled with darkness and water. And this lake is actually a symbolic representation within the whole complex, which represents the cosmos as a whole, of the primeval waters from which creation occurred. It was also very important in the life of the temple. Many Egyptologists believed that the priests would come here at dawn to do their ritual ablutions, to bathe before they went to carry out their daily activities in the temple.
The rites within the temple were determined by the position of the sun and included three phases: dawn, midday, and sunset. Before dawn, the priests washed themselves in the sacred lake, purifying the body. Later, they opened the tabernacle, and after having uncovered the face of God by offering it to the light, they chanted the morning prayer. The fusion between God and light culminated at midday with the sunlight. The statue of God was carried to a roofless chamber, placed on the top of the temple, and here received the regenerating embrace of the sun. At Karnak, this rite took place probably in one of the rooms of the Akhmenu, which is accessed now by means of a stairway that starts from the southeast corner of the room. It is a separate building, which Thutmose III had built. Its heart is a hall with a basilican structure developed in about 40 meters, 5 aisles and the nave raised, resting on stone columns. An innovative structure for that time, duly studied for the Jubilee Feast, the Feast of Sed, the renewal of the royal power of the Pharaoh. That it is an area made for the celebration of the king is proved by the list of the sovereigns set at the entrance, the decorations of the two chapels situated at the north, and the sunlight room. To enter in this environment meant being initiated to the cult of Amen and his human incarnation, the king. The same access to the sanctuary through a passage 85 centimeters higher with respect to the difference in level of the floor adds to the mysterious significance of the cult. Having entered the sanctuary, one is confronted with a complex in which the so-called botanical garden stands out. Low reliefs that show plants, fruits, and exotic animals that Thutmose III had found in the 25th year of his reign in the country of Retenu. The four fascicled columns are instead the symbolic representation of the cardinal points, the entire world represented in front of its demiurge, Amun-Ra, whose secret chapel can be noticed between the two central columns. In the dichotomy between light and darkness, Amun-Ra found his counter-attraction in Khonsu, the moon god.
Khonsu was the son of the god Amun and Mut. And here inside this complex, they built an isolated temple to this god. This temple built to be begun during Ramesses III, and it continued to be built until the end of the Ptolemaic period.
The sanctuary dedicated to Khonsu was built by Amenhotep III, probably by enlarging a pre-existing chapel. The temple is made up of a courtyard surrounded on three sides by a portico, which has two lines of papyrus-shaped columns with capitals as closed buds. There follows the hypostyle atrium, illuminated by cloistered windows. Then two vestibules and some side rooms destined to daily rites. From a stairway, the roof can be reached. Here, the priests observed the sky and the stars in order to fix the days for the rites of the liturgic calendar. Khonsu was considered a lunar god, being the extension of the fundamental light, that at night of the moon, the planets, and the stars. Also in the nearby temple of Opet, the birth of the primordial light was celebrated. Opet, the divine mother, the hippopotamus goddess in charge of births, is the recipient of this remarkable building, constructed with some blocks by Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, and finished in the epoch of Ptolemy.
We found in the foundations here that the architects who built this temple recycled many blocks from the Pharaonic times, and they reused these blocks inside the construction of this temple. Also, we found a lot of statues in the foundation of the temple. We found some staircases dates back to maybe to the Middle Kingdom, indicating that this temple, the foundation of it, began during the Middle Kingdom with the core of the Karnak temples, and during the Ptolemaic period, they began to do a renovation for the temple, and they destroyed what was found here before, and they built this new temple, which is unique with its reliefs and its inscriptions.
The temple is composed of a vestibule and about 12 rooms dedicated to mysterious cults. A team of restorers of the Franco-Egyptian studies of the temples of Luxor and Karnak is working on the restoration of the reliefs on the walls of the temple.
We are here in the north room of Opet, of the temple of Opet, where we came to work maybe 2 years ago. We began by this room because maybe it's more symbolic than the other rooms. It's representing actually the resurrection of Osiris. That you see there, this man laying on his bed, which is going to make a child to Isis. And the next room in front will represent the childhood of Horus, the child of Osiris and Isis.
In a year of work, the restorers have cleaned the paintings in the north room of the temple and have renewed the floors of the 5 principal chambers as well as making secure the walls and the main tower.
The work was in two parts, the cleaning work. The first part was made with chemical cleaning, and the second part was made with mechanical cleaning. The chemical cleaning was made with compresses, with carbonate ammonium and methyl cellulose melted. And mechanical part is made with micro sandblaster. Now you see the difference. You can see some weaknesses of the first state of the walls, which were really black, like on the ceiling, and on this part of the wall here.
The whole area of the Temple of Karnak really is crowded with many religious buildings. Apart from the enclosure of Montu and Mut, of which today very little remains, in the western area there is the Temple of Ptah that Thutmose III had built. The sanctuary is divided into 3 chapels, decorated with reliefs of the pharaoh. The central one is dedicated to Ptah, king of the earth. The one on the right to the goddess lioness Sekhmet, wife of Ptah. The last chapel served for crowning the sovereign. Always in the same area, there is a temple dedicated to Osiris, Hekjet, governor of eternity.
We are here in one of the most sacred places inside the enclosure temple of Amun-Ra temple. Here we are in the chapel of the god Osiris Hekjet, means the god Osiris, the ruler of the eternity. This chapel was begun to be built during the 25th dynasty, and you can see here one of the most important scenes here. The goddess wife Amun-Redis offering the 2 bulls, which we call it in Egyptology the new bulls, to the god Amun. And again, parallel to this scene, another scene for the god Amun here with his famous 2 long feathers. Down of this, you can see the same queen offering the 2 sistrum to the god Amun. And behind us here, one of the most important architectural symbols in the ancient Egyptian religion is the eternal gates for the god Osiris, the symbol of god Osiris. You can see the 7 gates the ancient Egyptians represented in these chapels.
To enter in the Temple of Karnak is equivalent to making a journey backwards in time. On the contrary to what one might think, the western group of buildings, that which from the hypostyle hall leads to the entrance, is more recent. In fact, the space between the 3rd tower, built by Amenhotep III, and the 1st dates back to the Ptolemaic era and allows us to cross in a few meters centuries of history. The huge hypostyle atrium is the result of the works performed by, amongst others, Seti I and Ramesses II. The 2nd tower was designed by Horemheb and completed by Ramesses I. In the huge courtyard lying between the 1st and 2nd tower, the temples of Seti II and Ramesses III exist. Again, within the courtyard, there was the large kiosk of Taharqa, of which today only one papyrus-shaped column remains. From a nucleus going back to the Middle Reign, the successive pharaohs have gradually added monuments, pulling down or partially modifying the pre-existing structures. The most evident examples of this practice can be found in the open-air museum at Karnak. The Red Chapel of Hatshepsut, dismantled by his stepson Thutmose III, who used blocks of it to fill the 3 towers, has been partially reconstructed. The chapel is noted for its red color due to the use of blocks of quartzite alternatively cut and shaped. White is the color that distinguishes instead the kiosk of Sesostri I, rebuilt in the first years of the last century, starting from the filler blocks of the 3rd tower. The kiosk is surrounded by 2 ramps and sustained by 16 square cross-sectioned columns.
This is one of the earliest monuments surviving to us at Karnak. It was built by the early Middle Kingdom monarch Senwosret I on the occasion of his first Sed festival, which was a kind of a jubilee at which the gods reaffirmed his right to rule, first celebrated after 30 years on the throne.
The more than 60 scenes contained inside refer to the Jubilee Feast of Sesostri I, the imposition of the crown by God. The kiosk of Sesostri I, in reality, had a precise function. It was one of the deposits of the sacred barge.
It's actually what's known as a bark shrine or a way station. The Theban triad, Amun, Re, Mut, and Khonsu, were, like many ancient Egyptian deities, traveling gods. On certain annual festivals or ritual occasions, they came out of their sanctuaries and they traveled out of the temple into the wide world. To do this, they used barks, great ceremonial barks in which the divine image would have been placed and then hidden from view as it traveled outside the temple.
At Thebes, the processional barge, carried on the shoulders of the priests, had to house the sacred statue of the Theban triad, which was transported from the temple of Karnak to the nearby temple of Luxor in a journey of great symbolic significance. The starting point of the procession was the sanctuary in pink quartzite, which the Macedonian king, Philip Aridaeus, had constructed on the remains of that of Thutmose III. At the center of the chamber, there is a block of granite on which the sacred barge was placed.
The god Amun, who lives in this ebit suit, the chosen place, or called the temple of Karnak Ber Amun, the place of Amun, they put him in the sacred boat, and the priests will hold the boat, fronted by the high priest, and the boat will go sailing of the Nile to the south until he can go and visit his wife Mut at the temple of Luxor. That time meant to the ancient Egyptian fertility.
The bark would be carried by priests on their shoulders and then often travel by water as well, either overland or by water. But the oracles could be asked along this route for answers to questions, and there would be the written answers on either side, and the bark would be tipped toward the correct answer, and that's how the oracle was answered. The question to the oracle was answered.
Every year, on the occasion of the Feast of Opet, the statue of the god Amun left the sanctuary of Karnak and was carried in procession to the South Chapel, the Temple of Luxor. The same procession could be performed in 2 ways. The first on land, the barge leaving the cell and then turning left in direction south, moved towards the Temple of Luxor. The second by river, taking advantage of the flood of the Nile that in September, in the period of the Feast of Opet, reached its highest level. The barge made its triumphal entrance to the temple.
The whole procession would come south to the Luxor temple along this processional way along which I'm standing. Originally, in the early New Kingdom, this appears to have been a canal so that the gods traveled by boat. Later on, it was paved over and eventually lined with sphinxes, some of which you see here. The sphinxes took different forms. Here, close to Luxor Temple, They are human-headed. And these sphinxes here were built by a king of the late period called Nectanebo I.
The entire procession is represented on the walls of the great arcade of Luxor. On the banks of the Nile, priests, soldiers, dancers, musicians accompanied the barge, running on foot through the streets. It is a magnificent feast, one of the very rare occasions in which public and private, divine and human, the elite and the common people find the ideal synthesis. Before arriving at the final station, the barges of the Theban triad were made to stop in purpose-designated deposits.
I'm standing inside one of the 3 bark shrines that lie within the first court in the temple at Luxor. The divine images of the gods, still in their portable shrines, would have been brought here for a rest at the end of the long procession from Karnak here to Luxor Temple. This is the westernmost of 3 shrines that are set right next to each other, and this one was for the divine bark of Mut. And you can see an image of Mut here. Offerings are being made by the king to the image of Mut here, and you can recognize her by her name, of course, and also by her image. She wears the vulture headdress that identifies her as a mother goddess, and the double crown of united Egypt. And you can see, here's one scene, and here on the back wall is another of the king making offerings to the goddess Mut.
Avoiding death through the conception of life. The place where life is born at Thebes is the Temple of Luxor, the house of the women of Amun-Ra, who visited here each year in order to be united with his wife Mut. Amun-Ra acquires the appearance of Amun-Min, an itty-phallic man adorned with the same headgear of Amun and with a whip in his hand.
If you look at the temple of Karnak, it's the house of Amun. This could be the house of Amun, but the house of the wife of Amun also, Mut. That trip that they make every year, that Amun will come through the sacred boat with the high priest, and they come through the Nile, and he comes here, it meant, in the mind of the ancient Egyptian, fertility.
Ipet Rezut, that is, harem of the south. Even the walls of this temple tell the story of who had wanted them, modified them, usurped them, and abandoned them. The first nucleus of the sanctuary dates back to the 12th dynasty, but only with Amenhotep III and Ramesses II, the Temple of Luxor has assumed its definitive characteristic aspect.
Most of what you see today is the work of a king of the New Kingdom, Amenhotep III. From the Holy of Holies, the chambers in the back, through a series of shrines and other chambers, into the Sun Court, and on into the processional colonnade. The Great Court at the front and the pylons that front the temple are the work of Ramesses II, who changed the axis of that court so that the processional way could lead directly to Karnak.
The place of fertility and the life that is born. Through public rituals such as the Feast of Opet, but also through private moments. In front of the people that take part in the event, but also far from indiscreet eyes, as in one of the more meaningful places of the whole complex, the birth chamber. In this area located at the end of the temple, the divine birth of the king is celebrated, the sacred wedding that unites Amun and the queen and gives to Egypt its heavenly guide, the pharaoh.
I'm standing in the birth room of Amenhotep III at Luxor Temple. An important concept in Egyptian royal theology was that the king was actually the son of the god Amun-Ra, and the form of Amun worshipped here was the engendering force, was the form of Amun who engendered the new king. The scenes here on the west wall of this room tell this story in a series of vignettes that go across the wall and then up and up again. We begin the story here in the corner, where Amun-Ra chooses the woman who will bear his next child. Here we have the god Amun, and here we have the queen, Mutemwia. So in fact, he chooses the queen of Egypt, very conveniently, who is identified for him by the god Thoth in this next scene. And here Thoth, who you can recognize with his ibis head, leads the god Amun into the royal palace, into the bedchamber of the queen. Amun awakens the queen with his beautiful aroma, and then they share here a divine embrace. Here's the queen and Amun seated on a bed. In the next scene, Amun tells the potter god Khnum, who is responsible for fashioning people, to fashion the new king, which he does here on this potter's wheel. He fashions the king and the king's double, his Ka, which is the life force that passes power from one person to the next. He's assisted here by Hecate, and then the scenes continue in the next register. Thoth announces to the queen that she is pregnant, and then she proceeds to give birth in the company of many gods. The baby is accepted as the new king by Amun and his wife Mut and their child Khansu. And in the top register, there are various scenes of purification where the king is welcomed by all the gods.
The most interior area of the temple, that dedicated by Amenhotep III to the cult of God, has suffered few changes over the course of the centuries. The most significant ones are those made by Alexander the Great, who wanted to insert a naos in the shrine of the barge instead of the 4 columns, and open a passage in order to connect it to the shrine of the statue.
This temple remained important throughout the Pharaonic period and on into the Greco-Roman era. When Alexander the Great took over Egypt, he took over also the cults of the gods and became a true pharaoh. He built the bark shrine that we're standing in right now, and you can see on the walls, he has himself represented in the traditional iconography of a pharaoh, worshiping the same gods that were worshipped here for thousands of years.
The Temple of Luxor is a rare witness to historical stratification. After the Greek domination, on the foundations there remain evident traces of the Romans. The chamber, which precedes the shrine, hosts remains of paintings dating back, in all probability, to the era of Diocletian. It is a representation of the 4 emperors that appear as gods in front of their soldiers.
Eventually, the cult of Amun-Ra came to an end, but the religious life of Luxor Temple was far from over. During the Roman era, this space was transformed into a temple to the imperial cult. The back rooms were blocked off with this apse, and this room was plastered over and covered with frescoes. The entire temple was enclosed as part of a Roman garrison. During the Christian era, a number of churches were built around and inside the temple. One of these can still be seen today within the great court of Ramesses II. On top of this church in the 13th century AD, a mosque was built, the Abu el-Hagag.
Witness Thebes for every city. The water and the earth were anew at the beginning. Came the sand to surround the fields, to create their place in the high ground. Then the land existed. Then humanity came into existence to found each city with its true name. Because city is called by its name under the surveillance of Thebes, the Eye of Ra. All the cities are under his shadow to magnify themselves by means of Thebes.
Today, after 3,000 years, Thebes exists no more. East of the Nile, in that which was once considered the city of the living, there remain the temples of Karnak and Luxor. The Egyptians had built them to use them as religious centers. Later peoples have changed the sense and the use of them, only to abandon them to themselves. Only in the last century, a long phase of restoration has been undertaken in order to return these places to their ancient splendor. West of the Nile, the city of the dead is the seat of the necropolis of Thebes, the place for excellence of mystery, the inaccessible place. If the temples in some manner were public, the tombs must be private. Today, the living and the dead have a common destiny. Seas of tourist crowds each year visit temples and necropolis. The desire to know and to measure oneself with history have upset for the nth time the sense of these places. But the mystery and the fascination that they emanate remain intact, a sign that the Egyptian civilization will never die.
Let me introduce to you a pharaoh who's different from all the other pharaohs. This pharaoh actually is the first one who believed in the world of one God. But the whole family and the whole period is like a mystery, it's like a play. Let me take you to see how can we end this play. Akhenaten, the heritage king.
You rise with beauty in the horizon of the sky, O living Aten, creator of life. When you rise in the eastern horizon, you fill every land with your beauty. You are beautiful, great, gleaming, high above every land. Your rays, they embrace the lands to the limits of all that you have made. You are the sun god, Ra, and conquer them all. You subdue them for your beloved sun. You are distant, yet your rays are upon the land.
Aten, the sun disk, the god that for a short time in the history of ancient Egypt replaced Amun-Ra and all the other traditional gods. Akhenaten, the priest of Aten, the only person allowed to worship him, one of the most controversial figures of Egyptian history. The heretic pharaoh who excommunicated the entire Theban priesthood and moved the capital to the heart of the country. The pharaoh who married the most beautiful woman of ancient times, Nefertiti. His life and that of his family, the lost dynasty of Amarna, are shrouded in mystery. Upon Akhenaten's death, his name was removed from monuments, cartouches and statues, and his city dismantled stone by stone. His mummy was removed from the royal tomb and taken far from the new capital. But where to? And why?
This is one of the mysterious tombs in the Valley of the Kings. KV 55, Kings Valley number 55. Actually, it is very strange. No one really can tell you the story of this tomb. Why this tomb was built? What has been found in this tomb? It's like a mysterious film. Something that you hear about, but you never know the real story. But I will tell you what's happened. This tomb, actually, no inscriptions. When you enter in this tomb, it has 22 stairs. And now you see this chamber, no scenes, no inscription, as if it was cut especially for something. And I will tell you about this something. First of all, when this tomb was found in 1907 by Davis, he found many strange things scattered in this place.
Theodore Davies found panels of gold-plated wood on the floor of the tomb. Others leaned abandoned against a wall. One showed a very damaged portrait of Akhenaten adoring the sun disk and bore the name of Queen T. And in a corner, 4 canopic jars were found containing the organs of a mummy.
All these objects actually tell us something about Amarna. But why all the scattered are here? But between them, a very important coffin was found. It's a beautiful coffin. And this coffin was moved to Cairo Museum.
A splendid sarcophagus decorated with thousands of pieces of gold paste and semi-precious stones. A multicolored inlay in the shape of a bird's wings unfolded, granting protection. The funerary mask had been partially removed, and the cartouche that should have borne the pharaoh's name had been entirely obliterated.
But this coffin, inside it, found a skeleton, a mysterious one, that some people actually believe that this skeleton was first, they said, for Queen T. But after that, they studied and they found out that actually, no, it's not for a woman, it's for a man. And I thought this could be for Akhenaten.
So whose was the sarcophagus with the cancelled cartouche? Why is the figure of Akhenaten surrounded by such mystery? And why would someone have moved his mummy away from the original place of burial? Who really was the heretic king?
Akhenaten is a very important figure in the history of mankind. He was not just an Egyptian pharaoh or a king. He was a prophet, he was a philosopher. He has changed many things at his time. For example, he's the first one, and I think the first in history, maybe the only in history, to create a revolution against his own regime, his own system.
I really believe that Akhenaten is the one that we should be remembered, because when he became a king, in his time, he announced the idea of the one God, the worship of one God, known in ancient Egypt before. But Akhenaten made it clear, the power behind the sun called Aten, and this is one God.
The second son of Amenhotep III and the powerful Queen T, Akhenaten took the throne under the name of Amenhotep IV, meaning God Amun is satisfied. Amun-Ra, the Theban sun god, was extremely important during the New Kingdom, the golden age of ancient Egypt, and particularly with the 18th dynasty. The priests of Amun became an extremely important caste, with their power greater even than that of the pharaoh.
When Akhenaten came to the throne, Amun-Re was the most powerful and the wealthiest of the Egyptian gods. He was the king of the state pantheon. He was the king of the gods, and his wealth and importance is reflected in the great monuments that were built for him, for example, at his cult center here at Thebes, at Karnak, and here at Luxor.
Whilst at the start of his reign in around 1350 BC, Amenhotep IV still respected and showed devotion to the gods of Egyptian tradition, in around the 5th year of his reign, the pharaoh openly went against the Theban priesthood.
He just worked against the priests of the other gods, especially the king of the gods, Amun-Ra. And the priests were very, very important and very powerful at that time. And he worked against them and refused to have them beside him.
This was the start of his heresy. The pharaoh replaced the cult of Amun and the other gods with the cult of a single god, Aten, the sun disk. And he changed his name to Akhenaten, the creative promulgation of Aten.
Akhenaten believed in the one God, which is the God behind the solar disk, or behind the solar power. And he just lived, he wanted to live in peace. We have wonderful hymns from his time. We can read what he is, how he worshipped his God, and the texts are very unusual because for the first time he is talking about the God who created all nations.
O sole God, like whom there is no other, thou didst create the world according to thy desire, whilst thou wert alone. All men, cattle, and wild beasts, whatever is on earth and what is on high.
Here in the Sun Court at Luxor Temple, we can see tangible evidence of a fascinating period of Egyptian history, Akhenaten's Atenist heresy. At the top of the column, diagonally behind me, we can see a cartouche that contains one of the 5 names of Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father and predecessor. You can see in this cartouche, which reads Neb-Maat-Re, beloved of Amun-Re, that the hieroglyphs for Amun, a reed leaf, a game board, and a ripple of water, have been deliberately hacked away on the orders of Akhenaten himself.
Akhenaten rejected the system that had been in place for hundreds of years and attempted to eliminate the cult of the god Amun, and with it the entire caste of the Theban priests. The heretic king was the supreme priest of the new god, the sun disk. He alone had the privilege of knowing him and worshipping him. His love for his god was without bounds, just as was his love for his wife, the great royal bride Nefertiti, whose name meant, "The beauty has arrived."
O woman of happiness, fair of face, gay with 2 plumes, gifted with all virtues, whose voice inspires happiness, lady full of grace, great of love, whose sentiments bring happiness to the Lord of the 2 lands.
She married to Akhenaten. She was his favorite wife. She stood beside him. She bore 6 daughters of him. And you can see her in all the scenes. You can see for the first time how she's standing beside him. She's receiving the life from Aten, that Aten is giving it in return to the people.
Nefertiti descended from an important family from Akhmin in Upper Egypt. She was almost certainly the daughter of Ai, the head of the royal stables, who became the great vizier during the reign of Tutankhamun, and in turn sovereign upon the death of the young king. Nefertiti played an important part in political life, so much so as to always be portrayed together with her husband in official ceremonies, even in military settings.
Nefertiti had the same position, and she was actually the one who was ruling. Akhenaten devoted himself for his religion, and the actual ruler was Nefertiti.
But whilst Nefertiti could address the god directly with offers, only the king could know him personally. Akhenaten was an idealist, a visionary, even to the extent of abandoning the city of Thebes to found a new capital, a whole place devoted to the sun disk. His choice fell to the place today known as Tel El Amarna.
He changed the capital, established the first designed capital in the ancient world, and he has chosen a place in the middle between Luxor or Thebes and Memphis, the old capital, and the classical capital, Thebes.
In his 4th year of reign, Akhenaten came to this place that shall be the horizon city of Aten. And all came and kissed the ground, as His Majesty declared. Aten has ordered me to build this city as an eternal monument to his glory. None other than he himself has led me to the place where I will erect the horizon of Aten on the land that belongs to me.
I'm walking through the ruins of the North Palace, which is a part of Akhenaten's city. We use the word city, but it's not part of Akhenaten's own language. The way that Akhenaten speaks about the place, it is an area, a piece of territory, but very carefully marked out and called Akhenaten, the horizon of the disk.
Why build a city in such a remote location? What led the pharaoh to choose that desert plain?
But in his words, it's the Aten itself which chooses this place. It is an essential part of his vision to provide properly for the Aten, that it has its own special place that has never before belonged to another god, a king, a person. And it's the Aten that chooses and presumably brings him here. And any other calculations that he had in mind are entirely modern speculations.
To the east of the Nile, O Aten, my father, in the place you have chosen will I build your capital. All human peoples will come here to adore you, and here will I build a temple in the sun's shadow, where my wife Nefertiti will come and adore you.
An important criterion is that the ground had not belonged to anyone, and that automatically means it has to be a piece of desert. He was attracted to the eastern side of the Nile Valley as the place of sunrise, and he was probably influenced by topography which had sharply delineated valleys on the east side where the sun could rise and so mimic the hieroglyph for horizon, which shows two hills and a valley and the sun appearing between them, above the valley. And here at Amarna, those criteria are met. It's a clean desert site, no habitation before, it's on the east, and there's a very neat valley entrance on the east side where, for a short time in the year, the sun does actually rise at a time which would be equivalent to the spring equinox in his time.
The city took just a few years to build. Akhenaten was in a rush to see his dream come true and used all his resources.
The stone parts of the city were built in a new way. One element of that was, first of all, to lay out where the building is going to go, a great sheet of brilliant white gypsum, which is mixed with stone chippings to make it really firm. And it's treated like a drawing board, but on a one-to-one scale. The outlines of the walls, the intended walls, are laid out in cubit lengths. A cubit is about 52 centimeters, so one wall will be so many cubits long. And this is to match the work that's going on in the quarries, where, for the first time really, all of the stone blocks are cut to the same size, a cubit length. And they're brought and laid down easily in the lines that have been laid out on the gypsum foundation. This must have helped unfamiliar builders, new builders, work who perhaps haven't had much experience before. Now, in modern times, these blocks that are 1 cubit long have been called talatat blocks. It's a word that is derived from the modern Arabic word for 3, talata, and it seems that it represents the measuring of one of these blocks by hand using the span of your fingers. 1, 2, 3. 3 hand spans, talata, gives you talatat.
This made construction much simpler and quicker. They were greatly embellished in the new, innovative, unique Amarna artistic style. The heretic Pharaoh's city had well-defined boundaries.
The first act in the creation of Amarna was the setting out of the perimeter of the site, and this was done by carving into the cliffs a series of big tablets or stelae, accompanied by statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti and some of the daughters.
The stela showed a sort of design of the city, listing the projects that Akhenaten intended to develop. The construction of a large temple devoted to Aten, a series of buildings for himself and his family, the creation of a necropolis with a royal tomb, and tombs for the court dignitaries.
And on the tablets, a long decree is carved. In fact, there are 2 of them. The first was done in the king's 5th year, and then a second decree was carved on the first anniversary in the 6th year. And they reveal some of Akhenaten's thinking. They're written in the first person. The first set of stelae tell us how the Aten chose the place for himself and for Akhenaten, and how important it was that it was a piece of land that had not been used before, had not belonged to anybody before.
The great sun temple devoted to Aten formed the true heart of the new capital.
In order to understand Akhenaten, you need to study not only the written sources, but also to appreciate the extent to which his own vision, which we see as a religious vision, needed the site itself, the place, the piece of sacred territory that was dedicated to the Aten.
The Temple of Aten boasted an architectonic structure that was absolutely revolutionary for Egypt, a far cry from the traditional temple design. It rose up at the center of a huge rectangular plot, measuring 800 meters by 275. It was designed without covering, because the sun's rays were to penetrate triumphantly within. The central part of the sacred structure, to be used to consecrate offerings, was left completely open, and measured 212 by 32 meters. A ceremonial path ran through the center of the 2 rows of stone offering planks in the first, large courtyard, with another altar standing just over halfway through. The temple was a sequence of open courtyards packed with offering tables. The monotony of the immense sacred complex was broken up by the alternation of base elements: open pillars, offering tables and columns, a few structures, small areas, and sacrificial altars. Unlike that of Amun in Karnak, the Great Temple was not a separate independent world, but rather an integral part of a city entirely devoted to the sun disk.
The royal family seem to have had several buildings to which we can give the name palace. In the center of the city, opposite the Aten temples, there was an enormous stone building that in modern times is called the Great Palace. It's a place for ceremonies. It's a very formal place. And in addition to that, there are at least 3 palaces made from mud brick. And in addition to the buildings that we call palaces, each of the royal women had a separate enclosure seemingly located out in the desert. It contained gardens, little shrines, pavilions, small places for accommodation. And these seem to have been places of retreat and relaxation, of privacy, where you could enjoy a parkland setting with reminders of the cult of the Aten.
Magnificent residences, richly decorated, luxurious gardens, buildings to be used for free time and relaxation. Akhenaten was an innovative city for the times in which it stood. The first designed capital of the ancient world. A happy little island, destined, however, like all utopias, to a short life and to a tragic end. The revolutions brought about by the heretic pharaoh were not limited to religion and politics, but affected all fields of Egyptian life.
The revolution was not only in religion, it was in everything. They have changed the language. The language became very simple because that language was to be used also by the people. So they changed the classical language of ancient Egypt to be a very simple language, which we call it in our science the New Egyptian language. At the same time, they changed a lot in the art, the way of showing everything. It was more free at the time of Akhenaten.
The new philosophy of Akhenaten was to become a clear message for the people, and the artists were to be its messengers. The pharaoh invited them to abandon traditional limits and give free rein to their creativity and imagination.
عشان يعمل التغيير الفني في النسب
Artistic objects underwent change as well. Human characteristics and feelings were given ever greater importance, but the proportions and artistic canons were no longer similar to those of the past. Akhenaten gave the court sculptors Beg and Tutmosis the job and responsibility of artistically changing the proportions, forms, and shapes. Tutmosis set up a workshop in the area of Tel al-Amarna, where plastic heads, rough drawings on stone tablets, and unusually proportioned busts of the king have been found. Some of these show the king with a very prominent chin, and others with a much shorter chin.
Everything was revolutionized. The proportions of the body, the expression of the faces. The art was to reflect the break away from the ancient traditions of Egypt.
At this point, we also see a change in the temples and fresco paintings, and in art in general. Styles become more human, with more refined features. Note the delicacy of the king's fingers as he touches the sun's rays during worship. We can almost see the emotions pass through his lips and body as he closes his eyes against the sun's strong rays. This is what distinguishes Amarna art.
For years, scholars have wondered about the bizarre representation of Akhenaten: wide hips, a slight bust, pronounced lips. Decidedly feminine traits. The discovery of the two huge statues found in Karnak has led to all sorts of theories. Some have discussed hermaphroditism, malformations, even Marfan syndrome. The statue depicting the pharaoh nude with no sexual attributes has fed many legends, but the explanation is actually much more simple.
Considered himself the son of the god who created the world. The only god who created the world was male and female in one. And because he is part of this god, he also, he has the same. He is male and female.
In order to portray the religious concepts contained in Akhenaten's hymn, which declared, "You are the mother and the father of everything created, and you, in your compassion, are mother or father," the artist had to modify the physical appearance of the statue to represent the sovereign as both maternal and paternal.
The heads of the pharaoh and his family are also portrayed in an unusual way. The large head may represent childhood, purity, or even more.
There was some debate about why the sovereigns, queens, and daughters' heads are portrayed as they are. And although some put it down to physical deformity or illness that probably affected the royal family, it was actually part of a whole new art form.
For the first time, the pharaoh was depicted in the intimacy of family life. We can see him acting affectionately towards Nefertiti as he plays with his daughters. But the most surprising images, and those which most break away from past traditions, are hidden in the necropolis of Amarna, shown on the walls of the royal tomb.
Whilst Akhenaten was at Amarna, his second daughter, Akhenaten, died and was buried in this small chamber, which is an annex to the main royal tomb. And this is a scene of the family grieving over her. Akhenaten, second daughter who died, stands here. This is an image of her as a young princess still living. And we know it's Akhenaten because her name is carved up here, and the fact that she's a daughter of Queen Nefertiti. And in front of her are ranged her family. Here is Akhenaten himself, her father. And behind, Queen Nefertiti, her mother, and beyond, 3 of her sisters. And they're shown in an attitude of extreme grief. They're in despair. They're raising their hands in a gesture of mourning and despair. And for a royal tomb, this is a unique example of the expression of deep personal feeling. The scene tells one a few other things also about the Amarna period, what happened. Here is the name of Akhenaten.
A dead body had never before been depicted, and nor had a pharaoh in a moment of weakness.
Here we see the king in front of his deceased daughter's body, saddened as any normal father would be. We see the girl's body lying on her bed, her family gathered round, crying and pulling at their hair as a sign of the great suffering endured for this tragic death. we see Akhenaten holding Nefertiti's wrist in an attempt to comfort her for the loss of a child. These details are a true revolution in Amarna art.
Akhenaten is no longer the pharaoh, the supreme god, but is a human being, suffering for the death of a daughter that just a short while ago he was able to hold and comfort, a man as many others. This image fixes a scene from day-to-day life in stone, as do the other images on the walls of the tombs in Akhenaten's necropolis. The tombs of the heretic pharaoh's city are significantly innovative as compared with those of the Valley of the Kings, where the other pharaohs of the New Kingdom were buried. In the Valley of the Kings, the tomb walls were decorated with scenes from the sacred books of ancient Egypt, representations of the journey that the deceased would make in the afterlife and of the trials he would overcome to reach the fields of the blessed.
When you go into the royal tomb at Amarna, there's not a hint of that. All you have are images. This is in the burial chamber of Akhenaten's own part of the tomb. All you have are images of the sunlight. It's a daytime universe that Akhenaten is going to inhabit after he's died. There's nothing on the walls except pictures of the Aten and the king and queen.
The Egyptians placed the kingdom of the dead to the west, where the sun sets. As such, the huge necropolis of the Valley of the Kings is on the west bank of the Nile. The tombs of Amarna, instead, were dug out of the mountains to the east of the city. The size of the royal tomb, designed for the burial of Akhenaten and his family, is truly exceptional. The corridors and rooms are almost double the width of the Theban tombs. And the sarcophagus chamber is enormous, 10.03 by 10.04 meters, standing more than 3 meters high.
This tomb was intended for Akhenaten himself, and I'm standing in the burial chamber. I'm actually standing on wooden decking that has been put here in the last few years for the comfort of visitors. If you took the wooden decking away, you'd find that underneath it, there's a rough stone floor, but rising up a few centimeters from the floor, there is this rectangular plinth, the surface of which has been dressed flat. And this is the base for a single large sarcophagus, which must have been the sarcophagus of Akhenaten himself. When the tomb was cleared by archaeologists, large numbers of fragments of a red granite sarcophagus were found in various parts of the tomb. They were taken to the Egyptian Museum, Cairo. An attempt was made to fit them together, and there is now in the grounds of the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, a reconstructed sarcophagus of Akhenaten. It's unusual in one particular respect. The sarcophagi of kings of this period normally have each corner guarded by a particular goddess, whereas the corners of Akhenaten's sarcophagus are guarded by figures of Nefertiti, her arms stretched out in a protective embrace around the corners of the sarcophagus.
Halfway down the corridor, on the right-hand side, a range of long, narrow rooms that were not completed opens up. Perhaps they were intended for Nefertiti's burial, but the body of the great royal bride doesn't rest in this tomb. Near the second stairway, there is another area, the last resting place of Akhenaten's second daughter, Mekhetaten. The pharaoh had also given orders for the burial of the most important figures of the city, including the courtesan Ai, a key figure in the heretic period, who, following the death of Tutankhamun, even became pharaoh. Other dignitaries, such as the vizier, almost certainly continued to live in Memphis, which remained an important administrative center, and were buried at Saqqara. A discovery that took place at the start of 2007 in the Saqqara necropolis confirmed this. The beautiful tomb of a high dignitary of the court of Akhenaten, Ptahemwi, the pharaoh's seal-bearer. The importance of the person is seen in the magnificence of the burial, decorated with bas-reliefs showing monkeys eating fruit and the seal-bearer receiving offerings. Akhenaten lived in his city with Nefertiti and his family, concentrated in the cult of his god in a sort of golden isolation, letting his political tasks slide over time as the boundaries of Egypt were threatened by neighboring populations. Relations between Egypt and its neighbors are known to us thanks to an exceptional discovery that took place towards the end of the 19th century, the so-called Amarna letters.
In the 1880s, people from the local village were digging in the city, looking for treasure, useful things, and made a lucky find. They came across a collection of clay tablets buried in the ground, and eventually they were sold as antiquities, and scholars recognized that they were tablets written in the cuneiform script, a form of script using impressed wedge-shaped characters, which was used to write the Akkadian language.
These clay tablets were commonly used for diplomatic correspondence at the time. They are of great historic value because, differently from the texts found in the Egyptian tombs or temples, they provide a true picture of the Egyptian civilization of the times.
They paint a rather surprising picture of the Egyptian empire. On their temple walls, the Egyptians like to present themselves as uniformly victorious. They're the great military power that crushes foreign countries wherever they are. But in this correspondence, it's evident that Egypt is just one player in a very complicated political game and was not that effective. And it's evident that the Egyptian empire was not an enormously strong one. And at this time, the principal state beyond the borders of the Egyptian empire was the kingdom of Hatti, the Hittite kingdom. And there was in Syria a constant sort of tug of war between Egypt and the Hittites, in which the rulers of local city-states could play each other off. And another feature that emerges from the letters is the extent of local treachery. Each one of these little city-states, although loyal to Egypt in theory and with an Egyptian representative present, was nevertheless trying to get the better of its neighbors, and in some cases intriguing with Egypt's principal enemy, the Hittites.
Akhenaten became ever weaker politically, the situation in Egypt so precarious as to require the intervention by Queen T, the powerful mother of the pharaoh.
Actually, she stood beside him, but something happened. When his mother, Queen T, arrived at Amarna, Nefertiti disappeared.
It is then that Nefertiti quite literally disappears. She disappears from the monuments. Her name was erased from the inscriptions and replaced by those of Meritatan, her eldest daughter. Perhaps she died. Perhaps she was disgraced. Perhaps she simply changed her name.
Nefertiti disappears from the historical record in about the 12th year of her husband's reign. In many inscriptions, she's referred to as Nefertiti Nefer Aten, and at about the same time that she disappears, a new king named Ankeperure Nefer Aten appears, ruling beside Akhenaten on the Egyptian throne.
Very probably, Akhenaten was no longer able to rule alone. His co-ruler, Ankhtiparura, would appear, however, to come from nowhere.
There's convincing evidence that this new king was female, and many scholars believe that, in fact, this new female pharaoh was Nefertiti herself.
Excavations over a very long period of time at Amarna have shown that there are 3 royal names recorded in that way. One, of course, is Akhenaten, but they're not the commonest. The 2 commonest are for Ankhtiparura and Nebkheperura, who is Tutankhamun. And that implies that to the people who lived here after Akhenaten's death, there were 2 coronations. One for this king, Ankhtiparura, who is Smenkhkare, and the second for Tutankhamun.
Nebkheperura, or Tutankhamun, the child pharaoh, husband of Ankhesenamun, Akhenaten's daughter, was, for some scholars, the son of the pharaoh himself and a concubine. He was not, however, the direct successor of the heretic pharaoh and the co-ruler, Ankhtiparura. Between them, a different person with unclear origins made his entrance when the heretic pharaoh died, Smenkhkare. Some Egyptologists believe him to be Tutankhamun's brother, others Nefertiti once again, reigning for a few years with a male name, taking the daughter Meritaten as royal bride.
But what happened to Nefertiti after she died, either as a queen or as a ruling pharaoh? She must have been buried either at Amarna or at Thebes.
The most beautiful woman of ancient times does not rest in the royal tomb of Amarna. Her body has probably been moved, perhaps to the Theban necropolis.
There are 2 female mummies, anonymous, found in the tomb of Amenhotep II, along with a number of New Kingdom pharaohs. And both of these female mummies have been identified as possible Nefertitis. Of these, the most likely is the one called the Elder Lady. She was about the right age when she died, maybe around 40, 45. And she has some queenly attributes, and it's a nice match. However, she has been more convincingly identified as T, Nefertiti's mother-in-law. This leaves the younger lady, but the problem with the younger lady is that, as a recent CT scan shows, she was really too young to have been Nefertiti when she died.
With the death of Nefertiti and Akhenaten, the splendid capital Akhetaten was abandoned, and the period of Amarna heresy obliterated from history. The cult of the god Amen was restored, and the Theban priests returned to power. The name of the heretic pharaoh was cancelled from monuments and inscriptions in an attempt to remove the very memory of him. And the pharaoh's body, buried in the royal tomb, was moved from his eternal resting place. Some scholars believe that it was Tutankhamun himself who took him silently to the Valley of the Kings.
In the Valley of the Kings, one of the tombs, it's numbered 55, so it's KV 55. One of the tombs, which was discovered early in the 20th century, seems to be linked very closely to Amarna, the Amarna period. It contained a mixture of items of burial equipment from different persons and a wooden coffin which had been quite elaborately decorated with inlaid glass and gold bands, which contained the remains of a mummy reduced to little more than a skeleton. Originally, the gold bands had contained the name and titles of a person, but these had been methodically cut out. And so the identity of the person resting in there finally isn't directly known.
That skeleton may also belong to Akhenaten.
It's mysterious. It's something that we have to reveal the mystery of this tomb because of all these objects. And this is why I'm personally interested now in this Amarna period, because of science that we have. We can use science in archaeology to reveal for the first time the owner of this tomb. We really believe that at the death of Akhenaten, some loyal people to Akhenaten moved all these objects and they threw it here. And the coffin from the tomb, before people could make destruction of the coffin, and they brought it here. But the answer would be soon, that all of you will be hearing for the first time that we will reveal the members of the family of Tutankhamun, and will reveal for the first time the mystery of KV-55.
The lost dynasty of Amarna has been shrouded in mystery for more than 3,000 years. Many questions have remained unanswered. The heretic pharaoh has yet to find peace.
I will breathe the sweet air that comes from your mouth. My prayer is to contemplate your beauty every day, to hear your sweet voice every day, and to have a young, vital body, thanks to your love, to have you reach out your hands that provide nourishment, and to receive it and live thanks to this, to hear you utter my name forever, and it be forever on your lips.